Hello and welcome to the second of our filmed webinar series. In this webinar, webinar number 2, we'll be looking at Windows 10 and I'm joined by my colleague Nico Senhart, who's our Innovation Manager based in Belgium, and Carl Dillo, who's our Head of Workspace based here in the UK. But before we kick off, I just want to run through a quick snapshot of who Getronics are. So in short, we're a global workspace provider, providing support for large numbers of global organisations around the world. We have direct presence in 18 countries, and we provide support to customers through a number of partners up to 90 countries. We have a number of service desks. We have 5 service desks to allow us to do follow-the-sun support around the planet, and we can support organisations in up to 22 different languages. From a Microsoft perspective, we've been a Microsoft partner now for 30 years. And gold certified in a number of different competencies for the last 15. On the slide you can see a quick snapshot of the competencies that we currently have gold and silver status in. We have over 200 engineers who carry a number of the different current Microsoft qualifications to allow us to support those competencies. Plus, we have a Microsoft Most Valued Professional, which is Nico, and you'll see him in webinar number 3 talking about the Enterprise Mobility Suite. So just a kind of quick run through of the topics which Nico's going to cover in this section about Windows 10 in no particular order. Talk a little bit about the benefits of upgrading to Windows 10 and why to do it now and not to wait. What the options are for upgrading, what that rollout or what that upgrade might look like, and how we can help you do that. And also as well, demonstrate some of the kind of newer features in Windows 10 that might help you make a decision to move in that direction. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Nico to take you through Windows 10.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. So also from my side, people, welcome to this webinar, and I will go a little bit deeper on Windows 10. And by the end of the presentation, my colleague Carl will explain you a little bit more about our own experience of our internal Windows 10 rollout. So one of the biggest changes with Windows 10 is probably this here, so one converged platform. What does that mean? You have now the same Windows on all kinds of devices, your laptop, your desktop, your phones, whatever. And this is actually a big game changer. It means if you will develop today applications for a desktop or a laptop, that they will also run on a Windows Phone. So regarding application compatibility, that's a huge game changer for Microsoft. Now, if you look into the features and what are, let's say, important features to migrate to Windows 10, well, I think the product team did a very good job in improving the interface. So if you look into Windows 8, that was probably the biggest challenge that our users had regarding adoption of that. Now you can really see that they took the best of both worlds, let's say, by bringing 7 and 8 together. So yes, the start menu is back. A lot of people asked about that. So you have the button and the traditional start menu there. You have also some new capabilities regarding user interface. I think about the task view, where you can have different desktops, or new snapping capabilities where you can snap a window to the left corner, and then he will propose you other windows that you can snap easily next to each other. You have support for multiple desktops now. Interesting is a continue feature, which will be available on the new Windows phones, where you actually have a full-flavored desktop experience on a phone. So as soon you actually connect that phone to a screen, let's say, you will have the same experience as you were working on a laptop or a desktop, even you're working on a phone. Also, if you detach the keyboard from the screen, automatically it will adapt to that, and he will see, okay, I'm now in a mobility mode, so I have to make sure that my buttons are increasing and so on to make it more touch friendly. One of the main features to go to Windows 10, if a customer is asking me why should I go to Windows 10 as soon as possible, is for sure the new security features that Microsoft is releasing. So the world is changing fast, cyber criminality is there, so it's clear that Microsoft is making their huge improvements. And we have some examples here, like for instance the device guard is an important one. What actually will that do is making sure that you can only run signed applications, so applications that you trust, on Windows 10. Because now each executable, each MSI that you can download from the internet is a potential risk, is a potential virus, and that's something where Microsoft wants to fight against. So that's the vision that they have. It will not go overnight, of course, but the goal is within the future that all applications that you run on Windows 10 will be signed apps, will be apps that are trusted. So typically what Apple is doing already today. Multi-factor authentication is also very important. So in the mobility world, a password is just not enough anymore. So you see that Microsoft is coming with some interesting stuff, what they also try to call, or what they also call, it's Microsoft Password. It's typically using some biometrics, for instance, your fingerprint, your iris, your face, and based on face recognition, you'll be automatically logged on your system. So also that are very interesting security aspects. And then we have also the credential guard. What is that? So what Microsoft will do is spin up a small virtual machine, so by leveraging the Hyper-V technology, and actually all the security stuff where your hackers are looking for are actually stored into that. So actually stored in a hard container. So it's way more difficult to steal, for instance, your identity in typically Kerberos attacks or pass the hash attacks. And so the credential guard is also a very interesting security feature. What is coming up then? Of course, is a continuous improvement in that sense that Windows as a Service will update on a very regular basis, much more on Windows as a Service in the upcoming slides. But enterprise data protection is an interesting one to make sure that you can split corporate data and enterprise data, enterprise data and personal data from each other. Also Cortana, your let's say your personal assistant is also will also play a very important role to assist you and to guide you in your daily work. That is not really widely available in Europe yet, but it's certainly something that we are looking forward to it. And of course, much more features that are in development today. So if you talk about Windows 10, next to the one platform statements, one other biggest change is that this is really the last release of Windows. So there will no any 11 anymore or a 12 version. Windows 10 is what it is, but thanks to Windows as a Service, Microsoft is releasing continuously new features which you will be able to install within your environment. Two important new terms that are coming in is Current Branch for Business, or CBB, or Long-Term Servicing Branch, LTSB. Now what is that? This is typically the path how you will actually adopt the cadence of release cycles that Microsoft is doing. So what Microsoft is planning is to release each 3-4 months a new version of Windows, which is cumulative with the previous version, and new features are added. That's a fast cycle we call CBB. If you say, okay, that's not something for me, I have a lot of devices that I want to touch on a very regular basis, like ATMs or devices in a warehouse whatsoever, you can go for the long-term servicing branch. There the goal is that Microsoft will timestamp each 2-3 years an LTSB build, and for that build you have then 10 years of support. But it's clear, if you want to adopt the latest features on a fast cadence, to have the best performance, best security, best new features, future features, you have to go for the CBB. Knowing this, it offers directly some challenges for enterprises, because actually what is Microsoft asking to the customers? Okay, update your endpoints, which is always a change, and do that very quickly. And that is typically two challenges that a customer has, because speed is mostly for the most of customers already a challenge. And if you do a change, typically you have to retest some stuff. So actually Microsoft is quite asking something very challenging. So yes, Windows as a Service is there for the enterprise, but a lot of challenges are there. We are there, of course, to help you and guide you in that kind of circumstances. Okay, so release rings. This is typically explaining Windows as a Service. So how Microsoft is doing it. So actually daily they have new builds of Windows 10, so they are coding as we speak, and that are typically builds that they are using for internal dogfooding, which actually means that they are just testing beta code internally. After that, they will release it to the insiders, and probably also you are an insider, so you can do a subscription for that. There are now 6 or 7 million insiders worldwide, where you can test early beta code. This is the first time that Microsoft is doing that, because actually they take quite a risk there, because they deliver software to the world which is actually not finished yet. But that's of course the way they have to go in a fast release cycle, because they need to have as much as feedback as possible to make the product better. So that's why they have that kind of insider program. Once they say, okay, our current release is ready to go to general availability, we are in the current branch. And what is that? The current branch is the updates that consumers will receive. So a consumer working at home, he will not be able to enable or disable that. He will just receive the new build, which is the current branch. And then 4 months after that, it will be stamped and released for current branch for business. So at that point, it's ready to use that build within your enterprise. Okay, so taking that into account, how do you adopt this current branch for business and that LTSB story? This slide is actually explaining you that. So what you can see here that each 4 months a new CB release will be there. If you want, and probably that's the way you want to do it, you want to win 4 months extra for testing. So probably you will deploy, even when it's initially used for the consumer markets, already some CB builds within your environment. Then you can see that CBB will be released, which gives you another 4 months extra time. And you can skip one CBB release. So in the end, you have 12 months time, so 1 year, to make sure that you are actually joining the CBB cadence. So that's important to understand. So yes, probably you want to do the CBB port to win some testing time, but of course you are not obliged to do it, but that's certainly something that we advise. Okay, also a question we often get, what if you want to go from LTSB to CBB or the other way around? This is actually what this slide is explaining. It's very simple, long story short, if you're on LTSB and you want to go to a faster branch, you just can in-place upgrade your current systems. If you're on a fast branch today and you want to go to the slower branch, which is LTSB, you have to reinstall your operating system. Regarding deployment choices, quite some possibilities there. So on the left you have wipe and load. This is typically how you know it today. So you build your thin or your fat images and you deploy it with, probably you will use configuration manage for that. So the task sequence engine, nothing changed there. So you still have there the refresh, replace and bare metal scenarios. A new enterprise scenario is the in-place scenario. And what is that actually? Where you just can bring your existing Windows 7 and 8 customers very quickly to Windows 10. In-place exists already for years, but it's the first time that Microsoft is positioning it as an enterprise-ready scenario. Why is that? Well, basically, if you go back in time, if you did an in-place upgrade, you were basically uninstalling and installing an operating system at the same time, which was probably not a good idea if something is going wrong. So the product team invested a lot in the speed of that in-place scenario and also in the rollback. So in case that something is going wrong, that there is actually a minimal user impact. And then we have the provisioning way. This is typically positioned for, you can create provisioning packages, which has a bunch of settings inside of it, and that you can deploy to your devices. So they call it really transform your device thanks to the provisioning packages. We see it mostly now positioned in the mobile device management aspect, where you can bulk enrollment a lot of 10 of hundreds of devices with the same settings within your environment. So you have quite some possibilities there. Maybe a remark about in-place. It's not for all scenarios. So if you want to move from 32-bit to 64-bit, you still have to go for wipe and load. If you want to do reformatting, you have to go for wipe and load. If you want to go from BIOS to UEFI, you have to go for wipe and load. So in place is typically for your stable Windows 7, Windows 8 machines that you want to bring quickly to Windows 10. So here you have a demo screenshot based on how an in-place scenario looks like. So you see here Windows 7 machine where I have some data on my desktop, I have some internet favorites, I have some applications installed. Then config manager is pushing my in-place upgrade scenario, so I kick it off. This is typically some OSD screens that you see. Then if you look a little bit under the hood in the task manager, you see that the setup.exe is actually triggering some other executables taking care of your in-place story. The machine reboot 2 times, you see typically that Windows screens, and then after 1 hour in this case my machine was in place upgraded to Windows 10. 45 minutes to 1 hour, it really depends on network, it depends on performance of your device, if you have an SSD disk or not, that sounds quite obvious, but that's typically the time frame that you have to keep in mind. If you log into that machine then, you see that I still have my data on my desktop, I still have my applications installed, I still have my internet favorites. For the attentive people in the webinar, you will see that I have 1 application less. The reason for that is that antivirus software is not reinstalled. because they don't understand the in-place scenario yet. And so Microsoft is talking with different vendors to see that they really can deal with that in-place scenario. The workaround for that today is just add in your task sequence one last step to make sure that the antivirus software is reinstalled properly. And then you see that Windows 10 is starting to talk with config manager environments, notifications are coming in, so also that is covered. Okay, mobile device management. This is really related to my first slide. So one converged platform. So you have all these kind of mobile device management settings available, even if it's a domain joined or a non-domain joined machine, on a Windows Phone, on a tablet, you name it. A lot of these features, we're not going to read them all. A lot of these MDN features were already capable on Windows Phone 8.1. So that was really already a good device to use. But what was tricky, if you have a non-domain joined tablet with Windows 8 on it and you want to do some MDM management with that, that was really challenging. And that's luckily solved now with Windows 10. Again, same operating system on all these devices, meaning that you all have these MDM settings available, which is a very important game changer. Okay, so how do you plan your Windows 10 project? This is kind of a snippet of workshops that we're doing with customers. So I hope you understand with Windows as a Service, with one converged platform, universal apps and so on, it's just much more than just creating again an image and deploy it to your users. So it's really the time to rethink the way on how you're doing your client management. And I'm thinking about quite some topics here. So we also see that Windows 10 might be an opportunity to say, okay, it might be a milestone to see if we adopt cloud, for instance. Maybe we have to do something about our identity. Remember the multi-factor authentication part. Internet browser, what will you do with the Edge browser? Also, don't forget that Internet Explorer 11 will be the only supported browser on Windows 10 and also on the other operating systems as from January 2016. So if you still have legacy Internet Explorer versions, you can contact us and we can help you to move away from that. About operating system deployment, I show you the different flavors. So you have the wipe and load, you have provisioning, you have in place. So also adopt these new scenarios. Again, security and access, very important. What about credential manager, credential guard, device guards, virtual secure mode, stuff like that. Developing modern apps, again, an app on a desktop will run on a phone. So the world is really shifting there for Windows. So also there are huge opportunities where we can help you. So with that, I give the word to Carl, who is my colleague, and he will explain you a little bit more about our own experience of our own Windows 10 rollout, and he will also talk about certain objections that you can have against Windows 10, and he will also counter them. So with that, Carl, the word is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Nico. One of the things we get with a lot of operating system upgrades, we've obviously talked about why we should move to Windows 10. We get a lot of objection of why we should not move to Windows 10, so we thought we'd look at some of those now. The main thing that everyone always says about operating systems, it's only just come out. Well, actually there are millions of people already using Windows 10 with the free upgrade that Microsoft are offering. A number of our users will have already upgraded it at home. This is quite important because now our user base is effectively working on the latest operating system at home and having to come into the office and downgrade their experience in order to do their work. The next thing that comes up a lot is management platform won't support it. If you're a Getronics customer, there's a good chance we're already running NextThings, no software, config manager on your estate. They're all already compatible with Windows 10. We've got them up and running successfully on both internally and on a number of customers. If you're not a Getronics customer or you don't have any of these bits of software, we're quite happy to talk to you and roll them out. The last thing is about the potential to adopt a bring your own device strategy, and that so you don't really want to move to a new operating system with the bring your own device strategy. The provisioning packs that Nico was talking about actually allows us to create a corporate environment on any device. It's targeted at the mobile devices, but obviously with it being a converged platform, we can put it onto a laptop or a desktop device. It means that a user can bring in their Windows 10 home PC or laptop. We can deploy the provisioning pack to it. It will give you the user the enterprise sign-on, the single sign-on to all our applications, access to email, anything else that we want to give them. If they subsequently leave the business, we can remove that provisioning pack and return their laptop straight back to the condition that it came into the office with only their own apps on. So yeah, that's a kind of key point. The thing from Getronics' point of view is looking at your organisation's long-term strategy and how we can provide the right solution to fit with your business needs. Looking at our own internal experience, we like to, as the expression goes, eat our own dog food. So our main driver for deploying Windows 10 was to get it into our environment and experience it ourselves before trying to come to customers and actually say, it's time for you to move. We didn't target all users straight away. We did a pilot. We decided to do the first phase completely as is, in-place upgrades, no application changes, none of the real rich features of Windows 10 that are coming, just exactly as the expectation is. We will look to move to the Windows as a service model later on. The first phase we did was around 200 users. We didn't offer any user training. About 80% of our user base is already on Windows 8, and the differences between Windows 8 and Windows 10 wasn't significant enough to merit the users going through any training. The differences between 7 and 10, incidentally, are not significant, and some of the customers that we've moved from Windows 7 to Windows 10 have looked at creating an A5 pamphlet which will have all of the sort of this is where it used to be and this is where it now is information for the users, which just saves on huge sort of classroom-based training. If you look at an older version of Windows, then there's probably a significant change that some classroom training would be useful. The real positives from the project, the rollback really does work. We had some issues on the very early adopters. We had to roll back 2 or 3 users because of some issues they were having, and the rollback was completely successful, returned them straight to their older versions of Windows with all of their functionality maintained. User feedback generally has been very positive. We've had very few compatibility issues with applications or anything else. On the negative side, the issues that we did have were around drivers. There is something that says that Windows 10 will just take and use any existing driver on the machine, and that should effectively work. We did have an issue with the NVIDIA drivers just weren't compatible with Windows 10. And within the first week of Windows 10 being released, NVIDIA had rectified that issue and we could quickly roll that out. We did have some problems with account lockouts. I was actually affected by that myself. Several times during the day, the account would just lock out for no apparent reason. This was tracked to some issues within Kerberos. We managed to roll out a workaround which fixed the problem temporarily. At the first wave of patching that Microsoft did, they actually repaired the problem themselves, so we were able to back out that workaround and test, and I'm not having that same lockout problems now. There's also some issues around firmware and firmware upgrades, and sometimes firmware upgrades are required in order to get the drivers and everything working. And finally, we had our VPN software just didn't want to work on Windows 10, and so that sort of accelerated our need to use direct access as our VPN-less connectivity. And we've actually brought direct access to the forefront of what we're doing, and that's working very well with Windows 10. We're getting a lot of interest from our customers and internally, other people wanting to join the pilot, and our customers saying, come and talk to us about Windows 10, hence the webinars. But we don't expect many people to go with a huge big bang approach and just roll it across the board. So we're looking at a more scenario-based rollout where we might target users that are going to get some benefit out of some of the Windows 10 functions, or as we refresh some of the hardware, it'll be an instant rollout to Windows 10. We're still seeing in the marketplace there's the familiar sort of let's wait for the first service pack syndrome, which obviously we haven't done. We're quite happy with where we are. That leaves what we can do for you with Windows 10. We can obviously offer support across all ranges of the IT. That includes the roadmaps for Windows 10 and your strategy. Our onshore, nearshore development teams will help with the remediation of applications if there are any issues with Windows 10 or development of new applications to meet certain features if you need that. That really just leaves us to go for a questions and answers session. Thank you very much.